By the time an American kid in 1870 could read a full sentence, they could already start a fire in the rain, stitch a cut closed, and tell you a storm was coming just by watching the sky. Somewhere between then and now, we lost every one of those instincts and decided to call ourselves the advanced ones. Stick around, because 30 of those forgotten skills are about to make you feel a little less impressive than you thought you were. Number 14 on this list kept meat edible for years using nothing you couldn't find in your own backyard, and it still outperforms half of what's in your pantry right now. Number 3 is a cooling trick so simple that most people walk right past the materials for it every single day, and it worked better than a lot of people expect a fridge to work. Let's count them down. Number 30, water witching. Long before well drillers showed up with rigs and permits, a man with a forked willow branch could walk a piece of raw land and tell you almost exactly where to dig. He held one fork in each hand, walked slow, and waited for the branch to dip toward the ground on its own. Skeptics called it nonsense for 2 centuries straight, and yet the wells those men located kept producing water decade after decade. Whether it was groundwater sense built from a lifetime of reading soil, plants, and slope, or something nobody has ever fully explained, families trusted it enough to dig where the stick pointed, and more often than not, they hit water. Some old-timers swore the branch pulled so hard it twisted the bark right off in their hands, and a few professional drillers today still hire dowsers before they ever fire up the equipment because, on some stubborn properties, the stick has quietly outperformed the survey maps. Number 29, hand digging and stone lining a well. Once the spot was chosen, the real work started. A man descended a few feet at a time with a pick and a bucket hauled up by a partner above, shoring the walls with fitted stone as he went so the sides wouldn't collapse on him. A good well digger could smell the change in the soil as he got close, feel the air turn cool and damp against his skin before a single drop appeared. Wells dug this way in the 1800s are still flowing on old farmsteads today, outlasting the families who dug them by well over a century. It was slow, dangerous work done in a hole barely wide enough to swing a pick, and more than one digger lost his life to a collapse or bad air before the job was done, which is exactly why the men who survived it were treated with a certain quiet respect around town. Number 28, the vegetable clamp. Not every farm had the labor to spare for a proper root cellar, so a lot of families used something simpler. They piled potatoes, turnips, or beets into a cone-shaped mound right in the field, covered the whole thing in a thick layer of straw, and packed wet soil over that like a blanket. The straw trapped air, the earth blocked frost, and a family could walk out in January, dig into the side of that mound, and pull out vegetables as fresh as the day they were harvested. When the clamp was empty, they simply built another one the following fall. A well-shaped clamp shed rainwater instead of soaking it up, and families learned through trial and plenty of error that a rounded top mattered more than the size of the pile itself, since a flat top just collected water and rotted everything underneath by January. Number 27, making hominy with wood ash. Corn on its own is missing key nutrients the body can't fully use, something frontier families didn't know by name but understood by result. So they soaked dried corn kernels in water mixed with lye made from wood ash, let it sit until the tough outer hulls slipped free, then rinsed it clean. What came out the other side was hominy, softer, more digestible, and nutritionally transformed in ways science wouldn't fully explain until the 20th century. It went into stews, got ground into grits, and it's the reason corn-heavy diets across early America didn't leave entire communities malnourished. Number 26, home cheese making. Milk that couldn't be sold or drunk fast enough got turned into something that could sit on our shelf for months instead of days. A little rennet, taken from a calf's stomach lining, curdled the milk into curds and whey. The curds were pressed, salted, and wrapped, then set to a cool, dark corner of the cellar to age. A wheel of cheese made in June might not be cut into until the following winter, and the flavor only got sharper the longer it waited. One good milk cow could feed a family cheese through an entire cold season. Every household developed its own signature, a slightly different aging time, a particular cloth wrap, a certain corner of the cellar that always produced the best flavor, and neighbors could often tell whose cellar a wheel came from just by tasting it. If you're enjoying this video and want to support the channel, hit that subscribe button. Number 25, maple sugaring. Late winter in New England meant one thing on a farm: tapping the sugar maples the moment the days warmed above freezing and the nights still dropped below it. A wooden spile driven into the bark let sap drip into a hanging bucket, and it took roughly 40 gallons of that thin, watery sap boiled down over an open fire to produce a single gallon of syrup. Whole families worked in shifts through the night, keeping the fire going under the boiling pan. It was back-breaking, smoke-in-your-eyes work for weeks straight, and it was also the only sweetener some families had access to all year. Number 24, smoking fish. Along the rivers and coastlines, families who couldn't afford to lose a single catch built simple smoking racks from green branches and hung fillets over a slow fire of alderwood or dried corn cobs. The smoke pulled moisture out while laying down a layer of natural preservatives across the flesh. Done right, smoked fish lasted through an entire winter hanging from a rafter. No salt cellar or ice house required. Whole communities along the Great Lakes and the Chesapeake built their winter food supply almost entirely around this one skill. Number 23, coopering. Every barrel that held flour, salted pork, cider, or nails had to be built by hand, and a skilled cooper could shape one from raw staves and iron hoops in under a day. The wood had to be cut, curved, and fitted so tight that liquid couldn't escape through a single seam, all without a drop of glue. A good cooper was one of the most valuable tradesmen in any frontier town, because nothing moved, nothing shipped, and almost nothing got stored without something he built. Apprentices spent years just learning to read a piece of wood before they were ever trusted to shape one, since a single stave cut against the grain could ruin an entire barrel the moment it was filled. Number 22, blacksmithing. When a plow blade cracked or a wagon wheel needed a new iron rim, there was no hardware store to run to. A farm blacksmith heated iron in a coal forge until it glowed, then hammered it into shape on an anvil, judging the temperature purely by color. Horseshoes, nails, hinges, tools, all of it came from the same fire and the same set of hands. A family that could keep their own forge running never had to wait on anyone else to fix what broke. Reading the color of hot iron took years to get right. A shade too pale and the metal was too cool to shape. A shade too bright and it was already starting to burn. And there was no dial or gauge to check. Only the blacksmith's own trained eye, standing between a useful tool and a ruined piece of scrap. Number 21, natural dyeing. Store-bought dye was expensive and often unreliable, so women turned to the plants growing right outside the door. Black walnut hulls produced a deep brown, onion skins turned wool a warm gold, and madder root pulled toward red. The fabric was simmered in the dye bath for hours, sometimes with a bit of vinegar or rusted iron added to set the color permanently. A dress dyed this way might fade slightly over the years, but it never went out of style because it was never in style to begin with, just useful. Number 20, basket weaving. Willow branches cut in the fall when the sap was down and the wood was flexible got soaked in water until they bent without snapping. Weavers built everything from egg baskets to enormous field baskets strong enough to haul 100 pounds of corn without a single seam given out. The skill took years to master, but the materials cost nothing beyond the time it took to walk down to the creek bank and cut what was growing wild. A tightly woven field basket could take a beating for 20 years straight, dropped, stepped on, filled past its limit, and still hold its shape season after season, which is more than most plastic bins manage today. Number 19, fire starting with flint and steel. Before matches were common or reliable in wet weather, a small pouch carried everything needed: a piece of flint, a striker, and a nest of dry tinder like charred cloth or dried fungus. A sharp strike sent sparks into the tinder, and a little patient blowing turned that spark into a flame in under a minute for anyone who'd practiced the motion enough times. It worked in rain, it worked in wind, and it never ran out of fuel the way a box of matches eventually did. Number 18, making rope from hemp and flax. Rope wasn't bought, it was grown and processed. The stalks were cut, soaked in water for weeks in a process called retting to loosen the fibers, then beaten and combed until soft strands separated from the woody core. Those strands were twisted together in a rope walk, sometimes stretching the length of an entire barn until they locked into cords strong enough to pull a wagon or rig a sail. A family with a hemp patch never had to worry about running short on rope. Number 17, keeping bees in woven skep hives. Long before wooden box hives became standard, beekeepers wove domed baskets out of straw coils and set them in the garden. There was no way to check on the colony without disturbing it heavily, so the keeper learned to read the bees from the outside. The sound of the hum, the traffic at the entrance, the weight when lifted. Harvest meant cutting the comb straight out, which usually meant losing the hive in the process, a trade families accepted because a season's worth of honey was worth more than one colony. Number 16, ice fishing and cold storage. Frozen lakes weren't a hardship, they were a food source. Families cut holes through thick ice with hand augers and pulled fish out through the coldest months of the year, then buried the catch directly in snowbanks or packed it in ice chunks stored in a shed. Nature did the refrigeration for free from December straight through March. A good ice season meant meals were never in question, no matter how deep the snow got outside. Families kept a running mental map of which parts of the lake froze thickest and fastest, knowledge that got passed down as carefully as any recipe, because guessing wrong about ice thickness wasn't a mistake you got to learn from twice. Number 15, dry stone walls. Walk in any old New England farm today, you'll still find low stone walls running for miles, built without a single drop of mortar. Farmers pulled rocks straight out of their fields every spring as the frost pushed them up from underneath, and instead of hauling them away, they stacked them into fences that marked property lines and kept livestock in. A well-built dry wall settles and shifts with the ground instead of cracking, which is exactly why so many of them are still standing more than 200 years later. Here's the part that tends to surprise people. Almost none of these skills required money. They required time, patience, and knowledge that got handed down at the kitchen table, not knowledge you could buy in a store. That's the piece the modern world quietly erased, not the ability to do these things, but the belief that doing them yourself was ever worth the effort in the first place. Number 14, making pemmican. This is the one that kept people alive through winters that killed the unprepared. Dried strips of meat were pounded into a coarse powder mixed with melted fat and folded together with dried berries for a shot of nutrition and flavor. Packed tightly into a hide pouch, pemmican could last 2 years or more without spoiling. No salt, no smoke, no refrigeration required, just meat, fat, and berries combined in the right ratio. Trappers, traders, and frontier families all leaned on it as the ultimate emergency ration, a full meal's worth of calories that weighed almost nothing and never went bad. Number 13, drying fruit into rings and leather, apple slices strung on thread and hung across a warm kitchen or set on screens in direct sun would dry down over several days into chewy rings that kept for months in a paper sack. Mashed and spread thin, fruit pulp dried into a leathery sheet that worked as an easy snack on a long day of field work. Nothing about the process required sugar, jars, or heat beyond what the sun already provided, and it turned an overflowing fruit harvest into something that wouldn't rot before it got eaten. Kids were usually the ones flipping the racks and shooing away. Birds and a lot of that dried fruit never even made it to winter because it disappeared straight out of the sack before the leaves had finished falling. Number 12. Patchwork quilting. Not a single scrap of usable fabric went in the trash. Worn-out shirts, outgrown dresses, and old flour sacks were cut into small matching pieces and stitched together into blankets that could take an entire winter to finish. Women gathered for quilting bees, working several to a frame at once, turning a chore into one of the few social events on the calendar. A finished quilt held decades of family history stitched right into the pattern. Literal pieces of clothing worn by people who were no longer around to wear them. Number 11, weaving on a hand loom. Once wool was spun into yarn, it still had to become cloth, and that meant hours at a wooden loom, pressing a foot pedal to raise and lower threads while passing a shuttle back and forth by hand. A skilled weaver could produce a few yards of usable fabric in a long day's work, enough over a season to clothe an entire household. It was slow, repetitive, physically demanding work, and it's also the reason a single shirt was patched and repatched instead of thrown away the moment it wore thin. Number 10, tanning deer hides. Turning a raw hide into soft, usable leather took days of unglamorous labor. The hide was scraped clean of flesh and fat, then worked with a mixture that often included the animal's own brain matter, which contains just enough natural oils to soften the fibers as it's worked in by hand. After that came smoking over a slow fire, which is what actually kept the finished leather from stiffening back up after it got wet. A single deer hide properly tanned became moccasins, gloves, or a jacket that could last for years of hard use in the woods. Number 9, trapping and snaring. Rifle ammunition cost money and made noise that scared off everything else in the area, so a lot of small game was caught quietly instead. A simple wire or braided loop set along a game trail, positioned at just the right height, caught rabbits and squirrels without a single shot fired. A person who knew how to read fresh tracks and droppings could set a line of snares in an afternoon and come back the next morning with dinner waiting in nearly every one of them. Children were taught the skill early, not as a hobby, but because a family that could quietly feed itself off the land never had to depend on a good hunting day or a full purse to keep the table stocked. Number 8, keeping a kitchen apothecary. Every farmhouse had a shelf of dried herbs that functioned as the family medicine cabinet. Willow bark tea eased headaches the same way aspirin does today, because it contains a close relative of the same active compound. Plantain leaves, crushed fresh and pressed against a splinter or a sting, drew out irritation within the hour. A mother who knew her herbs could handle most of what walked through her kitchen door, saving a costly doctor's visit for the injuries that genuinely needed one. Number 7, home birth and midwifery. For most of American history, babies weren't born in hospitals. They were born at home, with a midwife who'd learned the trade from the woman who came before her. She knew how to check the baby's position, how to manage a long labor, and how to recognize the handful of warning signs that meant it was time to send for a doctor. She usually stayed on for a few days afterward, cooking, cleaning, and watching the other children so the new mother could actually rest, something modern maternity care rarely offers anymore. Number 6, reading weather from nature. There was no forecast to check, so people paid attention instead. Cattle lying down in the field, swallows flying low and fast, a ring forming around the moon, all of it carried information for anyone who'd learned to notice. None of it was guesswork dressed up as folklore. It was generations of pattern recognition passed down until it became second nature. A farmer who could read the sky knew when to bring in the hay a full day before the first drop fell. None of this was written down in any official almanac either. Most of it lived only in conversations repeated at supper tables until every child in the house could recite it back without ever realizing they were learning meteorology. Number 5, building a stone chimney and fireplace. A house without a working chimney was a house that couldn't survive winter, so the skill was treated as essential as farming itself. Stones were fitted and mortared in a rising column, with a firebox shaped precisely enough to draw smoke upward instead of filling the room. Get the angle of the throat wrong, and the whole house choked on smoke every time a fire was lit. Get it right, and that same chimney could heat a home and cook every meal in it for well over a century. Masons tested their work by lighting a small fire before the mortar had even fully cured, watching where the smoke wandered inside the room, and adjusting the throat of the flue before ever calling the job finished, because there was no going back once a family had already moved their whole life in around it. Number 4, navigating without instruments. Getting lost in unmapped country wasn't a minor inconvenience. It could be a death sentence. So navigation was taught early and taken seriously. The North Star held steady above true north all night long. Moss tended to grow thicker on the north-facing side of a tree trunk where sunlight was weakest. Rivers followed downhill, usually led toward a settlement eventually. Someone who'd learned to read all of it together could cross unfamiliar territory for days without ever once feeling lost. Number 3, the evaporative food safe. Long before anyone had electricity to spare, Families kept a wooden cabinet screened with wire mesh and wrapped in wet burlap sitting on a shaded porch. As the water in that burlap evaporated, it pulled heat out of the air inside the cabinet, dropping the internal temperature noticeably below whatever was happening outside. Butter stayed firm, milk stayed sweet, and meat held longer than most people would expect, all from nothing more than wet cloth and moving air. Engineers studying passive cooling today keep circling back to the same basic principle those farm porches were built on generations ago. Number 2, barn raising. No single family could lift the frame of a barn on their own, so they didn't try. Neighbors from miles around showed up on an agreed morning, and by nightfall, a full timber frame stood where there had been nothing but a foundation at sunrise. Men worked the beams while women fed the entire crew, and the day ended with music, food, and a building that would stand for 100 years, built in a single day by people who understood that some things only get done together. There was no invoice for any of it, no contract, no payment beyond the understanding that when the next family needed a barn, roof, or bridge, everyone who showed up today would have that same favor waiting for them. And number 1, passing the knowledge down. This is the skill that made every other skill on this list possible. None of what you just heard survived in a book on a shelf. It survived because someone showed a child how to do it with their own 2 hands, then stood back and let them try it themselves. That's how a 9-year-old learned to bank a fire overnight, how a daughter learned her mother's exact touch for salting a ham, how an entire way of living got carried forward instead of lost. Once families stopped teaching this way and started trusting stores and manuals to do it for them, the skills didn't disappear overnight. They just quietly stopped getting passed on, one generation at a time, until almost nobody was left who remembered. So there it is, 30 skills that kept people fed, warm, healed, and housed without a single one of the conveniences we now consider non-negotiable. Some of them are already creeping back into fashion. People fermenting their own food again, raising a few backyard chickens, learning to can what they grow. Maybe that's not nostalgia. Maybe it's instinct, quietly reminding us that these skills never actually stopped working. We just stopped needing them until we did. None of this knowledge asked to be replaced. It simply got set aside once it stopped being profitable for anyone to remind us it existed. And it has been sitting there waiting ever since, patient as an old stone wall in a New England field. Pick one from this list and actually try it this week, not just read about it. Start a fire with flint and steel. Dry a batch of apples. Weave a small basket badly and laugh about it. Then come back and tell me which one you're starting with. Because I promise you, somewhere in your family tree, somebody already knew how.